Hi, this is Exorcist, a show where I take a look at some Gunpla and see how authentic they are. This time, we are looking at the HGUC 1-144 Gyan. YMS-15 Gyan is one of Xeon's next generation mainline mobile suits, in competition with HGUC. Much like Xeon's previous attempt with Goof, Gyan mainly focuses on melee combat. As Xeon correctly predicted, melee combat would be the most effective way to engage mobile suits. However, Gyan's design team got a bit too carried away, making Gyan a bit too focused on melee combat and were not really good at other battlefield tasks or mission requirements, ended up losing to the HGUC as the mainstay. Having said that, Gyan remains to be one of Xeon's specialist melee mobile suits at its twilight months, actually weeks, and remains a stable unit via its successors as Neo Xeon's close combat specialist. I'll be rating this kit with SAGA, Style, Action, Gimmick, and Absence. Style is how much does the model kit resemble its counterpart in anime, manga, games, or other media. And just like other HGUC, Gyan here is definitely too slim compared to Okawara's design. However, not too far off from its anime appearance, as Gyan is skinnier than most Xeon mobile suits, even compared to Zaku, at least for the appearance. In reality, we'll do a comparison in a separate video. Gyan isn't that skinny compared to Zaku, but it appears to be skinny. And you can also note Gyan is inspired by Gothic plate armor. So when I said a bit earlier or before how F91 is the first Gundam with a knightly armor design, yeah, that's for Gundam. For other mobile suits, Gyan is the introduction of the European Renaissance knightly armor. Let's take a closer look. Starting from the head, Gyan have a cross-track mono-eye, much like Dome. That is because Gyan is primarily developed by Zimmet. Like HGUC, there are quite a bit of crossover between the two manufacturers due to Xeon trying to unify the supply line. So something that an upcoming video will talk about. But in short, Gyan have a cross-track mono-eye because it is sort of a successor of Dome, but not quite. As for the kit, the spire have its own part, and the top half is its own part, and the lower half is actually a clamshell with a seam right on the edge of the front and back. Not completely out of the way, but certainly not very noticeable. Down to the chest, we got color separation for the chest and the rest of the abdomen, and then the belly. And you can see from the top, there are front and back half for the chest. Although the part design with a embossed slope, so it looks natural. I want to mention underneath the chest fan, there are detail sculpt underneath, on the pale gray part. So if you do make opening of the vents or other modifications, you can see through them. It is a bit hard to disassemble to show though. Separate piece for the waist, pretty typical for a revival. And then skirt armor. You can separate them if you want to. This line here, the separation is definitely easy to saw between or put a knife through, score through, but I keep it like this because I do like the idea of Gyan being very much medieval Gothic plate armor, so the front skirts are one piece. And somewhat rare for 1 to 144 HG, you do get inner linings for the front skirts and back skirts. Thigh is pretty typical front back clamshells, and then the knee pad is its own with color separation. For the blue parts, probably hard to see. The left and right side of the lower legs are clamshell, and the seam line disappeared better than Rujimaru, but that could vary from kit to kit. But it is a lot more apparent at the back, as you can see with the embossed line and then the not too perfect lines on the flare out trouser. The calves are a separate piece though, so the calves looks very good. Down to the feet, pretty standard Gothic armor shoes, I would say. And the bottom of the feet is as lovely as usual. You can also see they do have sculpts around the trouser, which you might not see, but from some angles you might, so that is cool. Going in, there's nothing, but it does hide this somewhat hollow inside of the leg, so that's okay. Back of the skirt is one big piece, and then the backpack is surprisingly a free piece, but there are some very natural assembly gaps, so pretty nice overall. The arms from the back, no problem. From the front, looks perfect. On the side, we get assembly gap, but well embossed with separations. Bicep is one piece as usual, but having a sculpt here really sells the assembly line down on the forearm. And it also sells the little bits of assembly gap for the shoulder. And that is a track for the shoulder joint to move. So without getting ahead too much, the construction of Gyan's shoulder are much better than those on the origin Zaku's. Now that we have a good look of this Gyan, I would like to mention that this is a revival version of the HGUC Gyan. The first edition isn't bad, but this with its updated part separation and technology being used on the RX-78-2 Gundam, it's much better, to be honest. Not quite having the right balance of modern coolness and Okawara thickness like the original HGUC, but in general, for a larger Gundam collection, this is definitely a better style. Color separation is pretty perfect. The only sticker aside from the mono eye is for the belly, which have a slightly different hue of gray, and this is an acceptable use of color correction sticker. You do have two different sizes of the mono eye, which I didn't replace with one of those germ stickers because the head design, the clearance is pretty tight. So, and I like this look. I really like how it actually do have space between the outer armor and the eye track. but it is also a very tight clearance that you don't think Gyan can get shots right in the eye. So while I don't get to have a super sparky-eyed Gyan, overall this is great. Easily and as for style. Next is action. Action isn't just the number of articulations, but how useful those articulations are. For Gyan, head is on a ball joint, not quite the forever HGUC ball joint, but a similar system that would be used by other HG for years to come. So despite having, practically a bucket for head, Gyan can look very far up and relatively far down. Turning side to side is no trouble as well. And then we got upper body, ball joint, and then midsection ball joint. And then, if I can, we have a second hip joint basically for Gyan to lunge forward more. This mechanism would be quite familiar as to those who build master grade doubles. On here, it is not the best, I would say, but it is extra degree of freedom of movement. Front skirt with standard clearance, you can raise very high, but that's how Gothic armor goes, and I guess with this extra hip movement it does not matter if the front skirt doesn't go very far forward. Side skirt is on a hinge going out and then on a pin for pivot. Back skirt, as we have been looking at, does have articulation. That is a lot better than most HG. And the legs is the renowned Revival 2-pin axle, so easily split apart. And there is also rocker on top of that, so you can rock side to side with the legs for even more hip articulation. As for the knee, a true double knee, not quite 180 degrees, but definitely enough for Gyan's crazy movements. Foot is on a ball joint that is also having a pivot at the bottom of the leg. And we have toe articulation. Backpack is static, nothing to be seen. Arms, butterfly joint, not new to HGUC, even Gen 1 HGUC have them, but inconsistent for the most part. But for Revival is pretty consistent, as is 2 modern kits. And then bicep and a true double elbow. That goes really far. Unsightly realistically, so for low accurate, it is just 90 degrees. And let's look at the shoulder track again. That is just beautiful. Not so well underneath, but it gets the job done. So yeah, let's go with our standard procedure. Super easy, barely and inconvenient. There's a reason why people really like the Revival line. So with mostly perfect articulations, along with pretty perfect coverage, at least for the pretty size, I think Gyan should have a S for action. There is no real downside to its movements, aside from probably a bit much if you are not used to gunpla posing. It will feel there are too many things to keep track of. Next is Gimmick. Gimmick are the onboard weapons, optional weapons, and other functionality of the mobile suit. For Gyan, you can't really see the pulse transmission accelerator, which is more like a turbocharger for the pulse transmission system. This is HG, so not a lot of internals. And we did mention there is a bit of scope underneath the chest fan. That is a lot more than your usual HG. And we did talk about their inner linings for the skirts. Again, more than what usually HG gets in terms of internal. Well, for 1 to 144 HG. 1 to 100 HG would get a bit more mechanics, as Bandai put it. So, Gyan shield isn't just a shield, it is actually also a firearm, with big missiles in the middle, as you can see, although sometimes they would be depicted as floating mines, like, mine for space. And then the micro missiles around the rest of the shield. And yes, we also get backlining for this shield. Also for color separation of the missiles / space mines, which are lovely. And yeah, there's no 3mm ports for Gyan, so we have a good old brace for the shield. And it is very secured. That's not it. You can extend the shield to lock it forward without messing around with Gyan's arms. Pretty much like a oversized buckler. That is because Gyan's main weapon, let's take out his standard hammer grip hand, is a beam rapier. Yes, this very thick blade is indeed beam. This beam rapier, along with Gyan's turbocharged pulse transmission ability, is what makes it a formidable melee mobile suit, who did give Amuro and Gundam quite a bit of trouble. And if you notice, we do got with articulation for the arm, so Gyan can actually go for a fully braced or drawn out fencing pose. And in fact, with all the leg articulations, it can have a very convincing lunge as well. So yeah, despite being, a bit unsightly on the back, it is otherwise very good. You can emphasize it a bit more with the hip articulation. That is a lot of play. So overall, even though there are just really 2 weapons on Gyan, each weapon and the infrastructures that comes with it, it's really detailed and works. So, and that's what Gyans have in the show. So once again, I have to give Gyan S for Gimmick. Last and least for Gyan is absence. Absence are what the kids failed to do so with style, action, gimmick, or sometimes sales pitch, pretty much. And I have to say, Gyan's sales pitch is perfect. If you want to go out and get a Gyan that has all the feature of Gyan, the HGUC Revival provides you with all of them and a bit more. Having said that, this kit, as you can see, lacks a bit of expandability, as in there's no 3mm port on the forearms. However, the backpack is the standard 2 pins for the builder systems, and there is the Sasage's Gyan builder expansion set for the Gyan, and with its pretty much standard revival joints, there is a lot of customization you can do with Gyan, even though Gyan by itself isn't really leaning to the customizability. And fittingly, just like the lore, despite HGUC being an older kit, it has more of that expandability. While it is, lore accurate for Gyan to not have a lot of customization options, it is definitely not good for the absence score. With the near perfect color separation, near perfect action, and near perfect gimmicks, because there's no firing missiles for the kit, Gyan costs as much as your standard gruntsuit, if not a bit cheaper, especially for the newer ones where they got a bit more things going on. So for not missing a bit from the lore and a very good price, I will give it an A+. Not as because it is not, super customizable, but near perfect. So, the verdict for the HGUC Revival 1-144 YMS-15 Gyan is, as for style, as for action, as for gimmick, and A+ for absence. Overall, Gyan is one of those mobile suits that somehow Bandai never gets wrong. Maybe it is due to its simplicity, maybe the design itself is just great. It is a pity that in lore it is not great at other battlefield roles, but there are people that try to bring more Gyan aesthetics into the mainline Xeon mobile suits. But that's for another video. For the HGUC Gyan, if you want a Gyan, get it. If you want a medieval armor inspired mobile suit, go get it. If you just want a really highly articulated semi-pseudo action figure, Gyan is also a good choice. Thanks for watching. See you next time.